session of AOIS Agra. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the scientific committee and the organizers for this opportunity to meet young postgraduates. The first topic today which I'll be addressing is the medical management of glaucoma. Initial approach to treatment of most open-angle glaucomas is often always medical treatment first, because it's very simple to start with, does not have any serious adverse reactions except a few drugs, and if you can take there are situations where you would prefer laser trabeculoplasty or primary filtering surgery when some patients are unlikely to tolerate medical therapy, or you expect compliance to be very poor. And there is some evidence that the recent lasers like the selective laser trabeculoplasty can obviate the need for any medications for at least situations where primary surgery would be indicated. We won't be going to those details now. When it comes to medical management of glaucoma, we have about 4 or 5 classes of drugs which we usually prefer. One is the prostaglandin analogs, which has almost supplanted beta blockers as the initial management, initial drug of choice for several reasons. We will look into it. And then we have the adrenergic agents, including alpha agonists, beta agonists, and beta antagonists, of which beta agonists are almost not used now. Probably many of the young postgraduates here may be surprised at how beta agonists also reduce intraocular pressure when we widely use beta antagonists. Before the advent of newer drugs like prostaglandins and alpha agonists, beta agonists like epinephrine and derivatives, prodrugs of epinephrine like dipivirfen were used in management of glaucoma. They increase outflow, but also increase the inflow of aqueous, but their effect on the outflow was far outweighing the effect on increase in aqueous inflow. So they were useful agents in reducing intraocular pressure, but now they have been given up due to the topical adverse effects. We then have the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, cholinergic agents, which ruled the world almost before the advent of beta blockers, and even after advent of beta blockers. When we were postgraduates, the most common drug, often the drug of first choice, used to be pilocarpine, apart from timolol. But there are certain specific situations where we would still find use for cholinergic agents. And then we have, of course, the hyperosmotic agents. We have about half an hour. I will try to rapidly go through, giving about 5 to 10 minutes for any questions that you may have. Prostaglandins, we all know, is the most effective topical drugs currently available, and they're all prodrugs of prostaglandins F2 alpha, acting on FP receptors. The most commonly drugs available are latanoprost, travoprost, bimetoprost, and enoprostone. Most of them have a similar mechanism of action, adverse event profile, and all those things, except minor intra-class differences which I would like to highlight. The mechanism of action is increase in uveoscleral outflow, because they tend to modulate the extracellular matrix that is present between the intermuscular spaces of the longitudinal muscles of the ciliary body. And this is through stimulation of several enzymes, including the matrix metalloproteinases and collagenases. The net effect is they increase the unconventional uveoscleral outflow, which account for 10 to 15% of the aqueous outflow of the eye. You know, there are several ways by which aqueous exits the eye. One is predominantly it is the trabecular, and the non-dominant, which is also pressure independent, is the uveoscleral. So in primary open-angle glaucoma, trabecular outflow is at fault. There is increased resistance to the trabecular pathway. So prostaglandins act by increasing the unconventional or uveoscleral outflow, which is the only drugs of its kind that is available for management of glaucoma. Indications are, currently it's the first line of management in ocular hypertension at risk of progression to glaucoma, primary open-angle exfoliative pigmentary glaucoma, and chronic angle closure after laser PI. Now, it has several advantages in normal pressure glaucoma, where the intraocular pressure is in the statistically near normal range of 15 to 21, yet it causes damage. And now, if you want to reduce intraocular pressure in these eyes, where the pressure is already within the normal range, most aqueous suppressants are not very effective. So in management of normal pressure glaucoma, and in situations where you want to bring the intraocular pressure below that of the episcleral venous pressure, like in glaucoma secondary to raised episcleral venous pressure, Sturge-Weber and conditions like that, again, aqueous suppressants will not be very effective. These are very special situations where prostaglandins would benefit by reducing the intraocular pressure effectively because they increase the outflow rather than affecting or influencing the inflow. They are not the principal drug of choice in most secondary glaucomas, like in inflammatory glaucomas, traumatic glaucomas. Most of these situations in glaucomas following vitreoretinal surgery. Name any secondary glaucoma. Usually, we do not prefer prostaglandins as the first drug of choice. We either prefer some combination of aqueous suppressants. But of course, when aqueous suppressants are not as effective, they can be used as adjunctive drug. Even in uveitic glaucomas, it could be used to treat residual uveitic glaucoma, provided there is no active inflammation. As a rule, in inflammatory uveitic glaucomas, you have to treat both the raised intraocular pressure and the inflammation. Principally, the inflammation has to be brought under control. Many studies have proven, in our own experience, we have found that prostaglandins are not very effective in pediatric as well as in neovascular glaucomas. Also, although in conditions like neovascular glaucoma, ICE syndrome, where there is complete synovial closure, and aqueous suppressants again may be of very little benefit because of very high intraocular pressures, and they may not be very effective in reducing the aqueous inflow or aqueous flow over a certain limit. It is expected that drugs like prostaglandins, by increasing the outflow, will be of benefit. Although in practical experience, this has not been proved. So in pediatric and neovascular glaucomas, we do not we prefer prostaglandins even as adjunctive treatment. And sometimes in conditions like neovascular glaucoma, prostaglandins, they have the likelihood of increasing inflammation. Now, what are the advantages of prostaglandins as first line of therapy? Throughout the world, most glaucoma specialists now prefer prostaglandins as the first drug of choice in most primary glaucomas and even in chronic angle closure glaucoma post-iridotomy. Now, they are very effective because they are capable of reducing the intraocular pressure below that of the episcleral venous pressure. This again because of their effect on the uveoscleral outflow. They have total lack of systemic side effects. The systemic side effects like joint pain, myalgia, very extremely very rare. And they are very potent and effective in IOP lowering when used once daily. So the scheduling is very easy. Compliance is far better. There are drugs like travoprost which have a very long duration of action. And even if you miss on alternate days, it is understood that travoprost will be able to control the pressures more effectively. They are mostly well tolerated except for minor ocular adverse events, which we shall see later. And as against most aqueous suppressants, especially beta blockers, prostaglandins are equally effective in the night as during the day. So this can be protective against the nocturnal dip, which you see in administration of drugs given to control systemic hypertension. And there is also evidence again that they increase ocular blood flow, pulsatile ocular blood flow, retinal blood flow, and ocular perfusion pressure, which may be academically, hypothetically, it is likely to be neuroprotective as well. When are prostaglandins not preferred? Obviously, like in any other drug, if you have hypersensitivity, allergy to any constituents of the drug or the preservatives contained in the drug, we do not prefer to use. And pregnant and nursing women, again, there are no controlled studies available, but we avoid using prostaglandins in pregnant women. You know, it is prostaglandins are used to induce labor in late pregnancy, so we do not use prostaglandins in pregnancy and even in lactating women. When inflammation is active again, it's likely that prostaglandins are involved in exacerbating the inflammation, but there are a lot of evidence to the contrary. It is often said that prostaglandins accompany inflammation rather than being the cause of it. Again, I will not go into the details, but the general rule of the thumb is you do not use prostaglandins as the first drug of choice in inflammatory glaucomas. You use aquasuppressants, control the inflammation, and if you have any residual glaucoma which needs to be controlled and inflammation is totally under control, you could use prostaglandins as adjunctive drug. And we do not use immediately prior to or immediately following any ocular surgery. And again, for the fear of inciting any inflammation. And even eyes at risk of CME, again there are no studies that are available which are proving prostaglandins as a causative factor in pathogenesis of CME, but in general we have noticed some eyes having CME after use of prostaglandins in the immediate postoperative period. So in these situations, you choose one of the aqueous suppressants rather than prostaglandins. But again, 2 or 3 months post-surgery, if you think that prostaglandins are required to control the intraocular pressure and prevent further damage, then you should not hesitate to use them, but closely monitor if necessary by fluorescent angiography. It's given once daily in the evening. Studies show that morning dose of prostaglandins are less effective than evening dose, and it is known to reduce the early morning intraocular pressure spike seen in many individuals. And more than one daily administration of prostaglandins is known to reduce the efficacy because of saturation of the prostanoid receptors, except uniprostan, which is given twice daily, and which again is not a very common drug being used worldwide. All the other prostaglandins are should be used once daily and at night. These are some of the adverse effects of prostaglandins. Conjunctival hyperemia, which is often very transient with drugs like latanoprost, but can be very persistent in drugs like bimetoprost. Iris color changes, not very significant in Asians and Africans who have very darkly pigmented iris, but it could be an issue in Caucasian eyes where the iris are lightly pigmented, and also when unilateral treatment is required. And unlike many adverse effects of prostaglandins, iris color changes could be permanent and will not reverse on discontinuing the drug. So if this is of any concern or any cosmetic concern to the patient, we should be very careful and take a prior informed consent. Avoid using unilateral instillation when the iris is not heavily pigmented. Many patients can get periocular pigmentation, which could be, of course, a blemish cosmetically. Recently had a VIP who said, who was on Lumigan for some reasons. He said when the cameras, when I talk, they focus on me. So when I saw this photograph, this video footage later, this periocular pigmentation was very, very significant. So we had to change him to latanoprost. This is very, very characteristic of bimetoprost. Most marked with bimetoprost, although it is possible with the other prostaglandins as well. Then loss of periorbital fat with deepening of eyelid sulcus. All this could be minor issues. The most common is the periocular pigmentation. The eyelash changes, hypertrichosis. The eyelashes become longer and numerous in number, and again it could be a cosmetic problem. and frequently they have to trim their eyelashes, especially if they are wearing spectacles. Again, these are all reversible, except the iris color changes. All the other adverse effects are reversible on discontinuing the drug. Now, prostaglandins, because of their unique mechanism of action, by increasing the aqueous outflow through the unconventional or the ovuoscleral outflow, they have a significant additive effect when they are combined with most other hypotensive medications, including pilocarpine. There was a concern that pilocarpine reduces ovuoscleral outflow, and whether combining pilocarpine and prostaglandins could be effective. Although, again, we don't have any randomized studies, but again, the experience and many of the authors' anecdotal experience and reporting is that when necessary for maximum tolerated therapy, when in advanced glaucomas, when surgery is not possible and you need to reduce the intraocular pressure to a larger extent, pilocarpine and prostaglandin analogs could be concomitantly used. But there is some evidence that if latanoprost is added to pilocarpine therapy, it's more effective than the other way. So you add pilocarpine first and then prostaglandins. Now, we all have a confusion which is the drug to be preferred. There are at least three principal drugs in this class of drugs. So latanoprost causes minimal intolerance like hyperemia and eyelash changes, but it is less effective than travoprost or bimetoprost. So you can begin with latanoprost, and if you require more significant IOP lowering, you could switch to travoprost or bimetoprost. Travoprost has several advantages like longer duration of action. There are even some reports which say that even if you give once in 48 hours, it is effective, as against once in 24 hours, as normally is recommended for prostaglandin. So even if some people, you ask them to use once a daily, routinely as other prostaglandins, but even if they miss one dose, even if they happen to miss many doses, it is likely to be effective in controlling the intraocular pressure. And there are some studies which say that travoprost more than other prostaglandins are more effective in flattening the diurnal variation in the intraocular pressure curve, which could be again beneficial in preventing progression of optic nerve damage. Now, bimetoprost is the most effective of all the prostaglandins, and it is also the most cost effective of all the prostaglandins. If you calculate the cost per eye drop cost of all the prostaglandins, bimetoprost is the most cost effective. And a meta-analysis of all the available drugs showed that timolol, non-selective beta blockers like timolol, and bimetoprost was the most efficacious and cost effective of all the drugs that are available. Now, however, there is high incidence of ocular side effects associated with bimetoprost, most frequently hyperemia, periocular pigmentation, and eyelash changes. If you make 50 people sit in the outpatient, I will be able to tell you who is applying bimetoprost. So much is the drastic cosmetic changes that can occur. That is the issue with bimetoprost. So usually you start with latanoprost, which is least effective but well tolerated. If more intraocular pressure reduction is required, switch to travoprost. If further IOP reduction is required, you can switch to bimetoprost. Now, when timolol is ineffective, there is no point in switching to other drugs of the same class like betoxolol, levobunolol, metipranolol if it is available. But in contrast to that observation, in prostaglandin, if one prostaglandin is not effective, you can always try and switch to another prostaglandin, which sometimes may cause further lowering of intraocular pressure. Now, the next drug that is most commonly used are the beta blockers. They act by reduction of aqueous humor formation, competitive inhibition of the beta receptors, and there is always an endogenic, adrenergic or sympathetic tone which controls aqueous humor formation, which is mediated by catecholamines. And this is actually inhibited by beta blockers, causing a reduction of aqueous humor formation and reduction in intraocular pressure. It is indicated in all forms of elevated IOP and glaucoma, including angle closure and secondary glaucomas. The advantages are relative lack of ocular adverse effects, unlike the prostaglandins, and there are several drugs available in the same class with very specific indications. We all know the contraindications. It is not. It can aggravate many of the pulmonary and cardiovascular problems. So you should not be giving them in bronchial asthma, chronic obstructive airway disease, and then bradycardia, heart block, and heart failure. These are some of the ocular and ocular side effects. Routinely, it can worsen the ocular surface disease and cause dry eyes. Sometimes transient blurring is a problem. Systemic, apart from cardiovascular and pulmonary, it can cause some CNS side effects like depression, anxiety, fatigue, memory loss, lethargy, sleep disturbances, sexual disturbances. These, unless you ask for from the patient, you may not be able to elicit. So you should always actively seek these. These are the cardiovascular, pulmonary, and some metabolic effects like reduction in high density lipoproteins and increase in triglycerides is possible, putting people at, with the coronary heart disease at increased risk. Now, beta blockers are again additive to combination with all class of IOP lowering drugs. And persons, if they are already on oral beta blockers, they may have little additional intraocular pressure reduction with topical beta blockers. So if they have glaucoma and if the intraocular pressure is higher, for systemic BP, we may have to switch to other class of drugs. And sometimes some of the side effects of ocular beta blockers can be aggravated if used along with quinidine and calcium blockers like verapamil. These are the specific beta blockers available. And the indications, they are alternative to prostaglandins as initial drug. They could be adjunctive to prostaglandins when intraocular pressure is not adequately controlled. And it's a component of most fixed combinations. Most other drugs are not available as fixed combinations. Only timolol is available as fixed combination with the other drugs. Now, how do we reduce systemic exposure? This is very important to educate the patients. One is you start with once daily therapy. If possible, use gel forming solutions, which will increase contact time with the cornea and the ocular surface, decrease their likelihood of systemic absorption through the nasolacrimal duct mucosa, and also always practice nasolacrimal duct obstruction or partial lid closure, which will reduce systemic absorption of these drugs and the systemic side effects. Now, they are the most favored ocular hypertensive drug because of their IOP lowering efficacy, ocular safety and tolerance, and we are also familiar. For almost 30 years we have been using this drug. Now, when is it preferred as a primary therapy? Now, when moderate intraocular pressure reduction is required, as in early to moderate glaucomas, this could be the drug of choice. Of course, there should be no systemic contraindications, and it's often the first line as either monotherapy or as a fixed combination when surgery is planned or anticipated, and is also the drug of choice in several of the secondary glaucomas, either alone or in combination with dorzolamide and brimonidine. Now, it's also available in fixed combinations, and we will go to the alpha agonists. These are several of the alpha agonists that have been attempted, and for several reasons, clonidine and apraclonidine have failed. Clonidine because of its systemic side effects like hypotension, and apraclonidine because of the high incidence of allergic blepharoconjunctivitis. And the most commonly used drug now is the brimonidine. It's a highly selective alpha-2 agonist, and newer formulations are available which are better tolerated than the ones that are earlier introduced. And IOP reduction is by reducing aqueous flow. And there are some evidence that it may also increase uveoscleral outflow, but the primary mechanism is by suppression of aqueous formation. Some of the adverse effects include dry mouth, allergic blepharitis and conjunctivitis. Still, it's possible with the lower concentration of brimonidine that is now available and is known to be effective in controlling IOP. And many patients complain of drowsiness, lethargy, and fatigue. Some patients may present with ocular hyperemia. It is contraindicated in very young children because it can cross the blood-brain barrier easily and cause respiratory depression. So in children below 16 years, it is not recommended. And in very young children, immature infants, children below 5 years, it is contraindicated. The indications, apart from chronic management of open angle and other forms of primary open angle and angle closure glaucoma, it can also be used to prevent post-laser or post-operative IOP spikes, and it can also be used as a primary or adjunctive drug in most glaucomas, and it is often the aqueous suppressants of choice in conditions when cardiovascular and pulmonary diseases are predominant. One advantage of brimonidine is that it has been claimed to be neuroprotective, although clinically it has not been proved in humans. Now, the cholinergic drugs, they directly stimulate the cholinergic receptors which are present in the ciliary body, iris and ciliary muscles, and they indirectly increase the level of acetylcholine. Now, how do they act is, they cause contraction of the ciliary muscle, and the ciliary muscle tendons are attached to the trabecular sheaths and the scleral spur, and by the ciliary muscle contraction will pull open the scleral spur and open the trabecular spaces, which increases the aqueous outflow through the trabecular pathway. It is indicated in chronic management of primary open angle glaucoma. As I mentioned earlier, it used to be the principal drug of choice earlier when we were postgraduates, but now other drugs are available. Again, in certain conditions where prostaglandins or aqueous suppressants it's not possible to use these drugs for either adverse effects or cost. Open angle glaucomas in aphakia and pseudophakias will respond well to cholinergic drugs, and of course it is a drug used to constrict the pupil prior to PI, and it is also used as a adjunctive drug in acute angle closure crisis to break the acute angle closure attack. Because it increases outflow rather than suppresses inflow, like the aqueous suppressants, it is often the drug of choice in pigmentary and exfoliative glaucomas, but we are unable to use it as a primary therapy because of its ocular adverse events. In cases of exfoliative glaucoma, if the eyes are aphakic or pseudophakic, it is often the first drug of choice because it acts by increasing outflow. In fact, cholinergic drugs like pilocarpine are the only drugs that treat glaucoma, the cause of glaucoma, which is reduced outflow of the aqueous humor, and they try to increase aqueous outflow through the primary pathway, which is trabecular. Blurring of vision from accommodative spasm, brow ache and headache, meiosis and decrease in vision, especially when there are central cataract, progression of lens opacities, retinal breaks and possibility of detachment, and exacerbation of ocular inflammation, and sometimes even aggravation of pupillary block from use of strong miotics or using miotics for a long time without PI. And even in eyes which PI has been done, prolonged use of pilocarpine can cause anterior movement of the lens, causing chronic angle closure. So these are some of the adverse effects. The final class of drugs are the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. It again decreases intraocular pressure by reduction of bicarbonate into the posterior chamber of the eye, and it reduces the aqueous formation in the IOP, and is indicated in situations. The systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are indicated in situations only where there is urgent reduction of intraocular pressure is required, and not as a routine therapy for chronic management of glaucomas because of the possible side effects. These are some of the side effects and the contraindications. It's totally contraindicated in hepatic and renal insufficiency, and in people with chronic respiratory disease with possible respiratory acidosis. Adverse effects could be gastrointestinal and potassium deficiency, renal stone formation, but chronic management sometimes can cause bone marrow depression. So if you're using for chronic therapy as we used to do earlier, you should do a frequent blood count at least in the initial few months of therapy. Now the topical CAI, the advent of topical CAI, we obviated the use of chronic use of systemic carbonic anhydrase inhibitors, and the main advantages of these drugs are they are devoid of the systemic side effects of acetazolamide. And they are indicated in chronic therapy of glaucomas like any other aqueous suppressants like alpha agonists or beta blockers. They are often better exploited as adjunctive drugs rather than as primary drugs because of their relative lack of efficacy as compared to timolol or alpha agonists like brimonidine. However, they could be the first drug of choice in special situations like the newborn, the premature babies, and very young children, where adrenergic drugs like timolol or brimonidine can have several serious adverse events, systemic adverse effects. And in very elderly patients, again, because of its lack of systemic side effects, it can be used in very elderly patients with cardiovascular or pulmonary diseases. Some conditions where adrenergic drugs are not the drug of first choice because they can aggravate the systemic problems. And when people are intolerant to other drugs like other aqueous suppressants or prostaglandins, this could often be effective. The advantage of topical CAA, it is more effective than timolol or brimonidine in combination with prostaglandins. That's been a finding from some of the studies, although we don't prefer to use it in practical experience, practical day-to-day practice. But many studies say that it could be more effective when used in conjunction with prostaglandins in comparison to brimonidine or timolol. Now, these are some of the ocular side effects, especially pain, burning on or stinging on instillation, and metallic taste in the mouth. Visual disturbances has been reported, but these in general are lesser with the brinzolamide, which is a newer formulation. Now, summarizing the glaucoma medical therapy, when you start therapy, you need to, how do you choose therapy is you need to determine the target intraocular pressure, which will tell you how much, what is the magnitude of IOP reduction that is required to prevent further progressive disease. And depending on that, you choose the class of drugs to control intraocular pressure. Some of the other considerations need to be the cost of treatment, the efficacy, the ocular and systemic possible side effects, and the systemic contraindications. The specific glaucoma diagnosis. Some of the glaucoma diagnosis, they would do better if you use drugs which increase outflow, like exfoliative or pigmentary. Some, like secondary glaucomas, you should prefer aqueous suppressants like beta blockers. And also, the drugs which would require multiple instillations, like topical CAA, need to be used 3 times a day, and where adherence would be, persistence would be a problem. In that case, you should choose a drug which is effective once daily, like prostaglandins or a beta blocker. Even beta blockers could be effective when used once daily. Now, advantages of medical therapy. Most glaucomas, especially in early moderate stage, could be well controlled. Adverse effects, serious adverse effects are very, very uncommon, and they are tolerable and could also be reversible on discontinuing the drug, and they are known to be quite cost effective in the short term. Now, what are the disadvantages? Over long term, it is less effective than surgery. cost, and as the number of medications is required and disease progresses, the cost tends to escalate over time. And the long-term use of medications will adversely affect the outcome of filtering surgery. There are potential cross-reactions possible with other systemic medications. Then prolonged use can also cause ocular surface disease, dry eye syndrome, lot of symptoms, decrease in quality of life, and the persistence and adherence to prolonged medical therapy is always challenging and need to be addressed. Now, initial management, set the target IOP, and prostaglandins and ocular beta blockers are often the initial drug of choice, but exclude systemic contraindications for beta blockers. Brimonidine is the initial drug of choice when prostaglandins or beta blockers are not indicated or contraindicated. Dorzolamide in young children and in select elderly patients with systemic diseases where prostaglandins also cannot be used. Now, monotherapy fails to control IOP in almost 50%, and so multiple drugs are required, but they increase the cost and the potential adverse effects, and they also challenge the persistence or compliance as far as the patients are concerned. Now, you add medication when disease progression is seen in spite of IOP control, or you require additional intraocular pressure lowering is required to achieve the target. You substitute medications when there is loss of drug efficacy or there is intolerance. The fixed combination of drugs available with timolol with most other drugs reduce the cost, reduce the exposure to preservatives, and there is reduction in drug exposure with possible reduced ocular side effects. They also increase compliance because of better scheduling, and when multiple drugs are used, there could be washout effect which could be avoided or obviated with the use of fixed combination drugs. Consider maximal medical treatment, but there is always issues of cost, compliance issues, and adverse effects. Consider alternative therapy when medical treatment fails as early as possible, like selective laser trabeculoplasty, or if the surgeons are familiar with non-penetrating surgery in early glaucoma, or trabeculectomy in moderate to advanced glaucoma.